I'd like to move to the next presentation from Ms. Scansen, as outlined in CMD 13H 13.28, 14.26, and 15.25. Push a button.
Good afternoon, Commission. I want to welcome the community here as well. I know there's a lot of people behind me from Ronge, people who are interested in the outcome of these hearings. I'd like to begin by introducing myself. My name is Kirstin Scansen. I'm from the Lac La Ronge Indian Band. I'm a graduate student at the University of Victoria in the Indigenous Governance program. The Ronge Band is part of a larger Nehido Woods Cree Nation. That's the territory that we're standing on today. Cameco. Our territories, which in addition to Dene Sutlene territories you call your northern heartbeat, are absolutely central to who we are as peoples. While you believe this land exists to pump money through the arteries of your corporation and into the veins of your stakeholders, we are here to say that the land is worth much more than that. To be clear, I am unapologetically against the expansion of the world's already largest uranium mines and mills on Nehido and Dene Sutlene territories. We need to end the global expansion of the nuclear industry due to safety, health, and ethical concerns. To start, Commission, I'd like to refer to Section 24 of the Nuclear Safety Commission Act, which states that the Nuclear Safety Commission must ensure that licensed applicants such as Cameco have, quote, made adequate provision for environmental protection and the health and safety of persons and measures required to implement international agreements to which Canada has agreed.
Ms. Scansen, sorry, we have 3 translators in the back. They cannot follow you. If you just could have a pace a bit slower.
Okay.
Please, thank you.
So first and foremost, your mandate states that you must commit yourself to human and social justice. That said, as we have heard this morning from the Sierra Club of Canada, according to Cameco's own data, there are very alarming release exceedances of arsenic, lead, cadmium, selenium, molybdenum, and gamma, alpha, and beta radiation into the water and air systems of Cree and Dene Sutlene territories. Effluent from the mines, despite being treated, is contaminated with radioactive material and other hard metals that harm the health and safety of Indigenous peoples, not only in Northern Saskatchewan, but as we saw in the report, in the Arctic as well. I'd like to speak briefly to the current colonial situation of Canada today. Modern Indian bands created through the Indian Act are administrative bodies confronted with the contradictory task of representing a nation of people that have been devastated by colonialism while remaining tied up in the oppressive, unjust regime of the colonial framework. Although our nations signed binding spiritual treaties with your ancestors, Chief and Council leadership is trapped into relationships of forced dependency with the provincial government of Saskatchewan and the federal government of Canada. As a band, the La Ronge Band, we have our own businesses, yet the majority of the revenue is confiscated by the province and the federal government. I learned this from my own leadership as well, who explained to me the financial outlook of my people. Because of this injustice, in order to provide basic social necessities such as health, education, and housing, we are increasingly becoming forced to make our lands readily available for resource extraction. To the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commissioners, as a so-called regulator and licensor, you play a direct role in that process. And to Cameco, it is into this socio-political disaster that you find yourselves seeking to have your uranium mining licenses reissued and your production on Nehido and Denesut-Lene territories expanded by 33.3%. I won't sugarcoat or make light of the threat that your presence has on this land and on lands far removed from here. Uranium is a deadly substance that has no benefit on the whole to humanity. Cameco's actions in Northern Saskatchewan can be linked to a global nuclear system that we are witnessing before our eyes as reckless, dangerous, toxic, and fatal. Here I am talking specifically about the direct connections between Saskatchewan's uranium and the Fukushima nuclear disaster, depleted uranium weaponry in the Middle East, the proliferation of nuclear weapons worldwide, and the consistent release of alpha, beta, and gamma rays into the atmosphere at each and every stage of the uranium energy process. So, how does the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission's licensing process replicate colonial relationships of power and control? I'd like to take some time to talk about the concept of consultation to the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. In the truest sense of the term, consultation implies a dialogical process whereby one party works in partnership with one or more other parties to develop some sort of product, a plan, or a decision. In the case of the relicensing process that the CNSC undertakes, for example, true consultation with Indigenous peoples would involve meaningfully engaging with these groups while remaining cognizant and sensitive to the asymmetrical power struggles which influence their capacity to act as self-determining peoples in the modern colonial framework. Most importantly, true consultation would involve respecting the rights of Indigenous peoples to say no to resource development. The CNSC has not yet demonstrated that it has the institutional or moral capacity to respect the rights of Indigenous peoples to act in self-determining ways, which, by the way, are laid out as rights in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which was signed by Canada. And to that, I'd like to add as a question afterwards for the presenters about whether or not they've ever rejected a license and if they could explain to me what happened in that situation. And as well, I'd like to have addressed the recent approval of the Matoush mine licenses, despite the jurisdictional complexities between the James Bay Cree and the province of Quebec. So I'll have you guys explain that to us, how that worked. And whether or not you feel that you even had the capacity as an organization to respect the rights of Indigenous peoples. On August 20th, 2013, I attended the information session hosted by the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission here in Ronge, Saskatchewan. I sat and listened as your representatives explained to me how you would never compromise safety. I'm here to tell you that the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission has already compromised the safety of people all over the world. At this time, 18 to 20% of the world's uranium comes from Saskatchewan. So, at this time, 18 to 20% of the world's nuclear meltdowns and future meltdowns are the fault of Saskatchewan uranium. We can't separate the uranium coming out of the ground at this location with the problems with the nuclear system worldwide. There's no way to separate that. 18 to 20% of the radiation that consistently leaks out of nuclear power plants worldwide comes out of Saskatchewan. That means that 18 to 20% of the global increase in harmful background radiation comes out of Saskatchewan. I am personally responsible as somebody from this area to end these injustices. We are personally responsible as people involved in this process to end these injustices. It was clear during the information session recently that the focus on the reduction of impact on Aboriginal rights is there, When I asked the Commission why they used the terminology reduce and whether or not they could speak to me about eliminating the effects on treaty rights of uranium mining, they mentioned to me that they would sometimes allow Indigenous people to maintain their trap lines surrounding the largest uranium mines, which they wanted me to feel like was very benevolent of them. Now, I was here yesterday, President Binder. I listened in as we mentioned, or we were discussing Japan and TEPCO. The fact that you spoke of your inability to ensure that the end product is used safely is ludicrous. Your ability, Commission, to answer so many questions with honesty and truth reveals to me your inadequacy as a Commission. The fact that you set up for this hearing entails that I sit 1.5 meters below you and speak up to you is ludicrous as well. I'm here to let the CNSC, Cameco, and its associate corporations know that the complicity of the Chief and Council of the Lac La Ronge Indian Band and other local peoples in the uranium mining industry is not representative of Indigenous perspectives at the community level. I'm here to let you know that the uranium mining industry has gone on too long without being effectively challenged. As the pace of uranium extraction on Dene Sutlene and Nehido territory increases, we find ourselves working increasingly closer to fight against the destruction of our territories. I'd like to thank the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission for listening and hearing my words this afternoon. There's no doubt in my mind that you're aware of how problematic the uranium mining industry is. I'd like to remind you to uphold your ancestral treaty responsibility, because we are all treaty people, to respect the people of this land and your treaty commitments to protect the integrity of the territories as well. One thing I was taught was that when we made treaty with your ancestors, we took you in as family and we gave you responsibilities for you to have access to living on this territory. Your people agreed. The responsibility was at all times to ensure the destruction of the territory did not occur. Your treaty right to be here depends on that responsibility, and you are not upholding it. Thank you.
Thank you. Who wants to ask questions? Anybody? Well, Mr. Hervé?
Well, just there has been some question asked about Matoush, and maybe the staff could answer those questions.
I wouldn't spend a lot of time on Matoush. This is not a topic of discussion, but just a quick reply, please.
The Matoush was, terms Jamal for the record, the hearing was conducted for Matoush, and it was in order to assess safety, and that was the mandate of the Commission. So the hearing was focused on the mandate of the Commission itself. And then, as in any other facilities or mines, there is always the interconnectivity with the provincial role with respect to a decision. So we spoke before about joint review panels with respect to environmental assessment, and political decision was made in Quebec with respect to the Matoush and the way forward with respect to that project. So again, regulatory processes at the federal and provincial level took place and decisions were rendered. The decision of the Commission is based on the safety of the operations of the facility.
For somebody who showed a great interest in uranium, did you read the decision? It's posted on our website in all its glory, with all its detail, with all the interveners. You feel free to actually read it anytime.
Okay, I'll go back and I'll read through that.
That'll be good.
Can you speak, though, specifically about the complexities? Like, I'm asking you a question.
No, I do not want to speak about the
complexity.
As the
President, you can't speak about the complexities involved in the jurisdictional...
We have enough problem dealing with the 3 mines here. I don't want to talk about Matoush now.
Are you able to respect the veto of Indigenous peoples to say no to uranium mining on their territories? Are you able to do that, and have you ever done that? When people have spoken up and said no, have you ever respected that?
We are analyzing the safety of a proposed application. We have turned down application. We've said no to operation in nuclear, and it is based on the science of the application.
How did that science differ from the science that we heard this morning from the Sierra Club?
Excuse me, we are here to ask the question.
You're on my territory, and you're speaking to a Treaty 6 woman. I'm asking you a question, and I deserve to ask questions.
You can ask the question that relate to the safety of the application in front of us.
I'm asking what the difference is between the safety of the application in front of us and the Matouche.
The Matouche?
Or sorry, the ones that you rejected. Where is the difference? How bad does it have to get before you reject it? How many thousands of percent does the hard metals and radioactivity limits have to exceed before you say no?
We do not approve applications that don't abide by our regulatory safety limits. And it is not necessarily on mines, it's on nuclear activities, on radioactive. Maybe you can give an example, a quick example of a particular rejection of particular or stoppage of activity, of an order.
Mr. Juma, for the record, there are a couple things. As it's been mentioned, safety is paramount. So first of all, if an application comes in, it must meet all the requirements with respect to the safety standard and ensuring, because our mandate is no minimal impact to the environment and no impact with respect to the health and safety of the workers, the environment, and the public. We have the powers as inspectors, and I've got my colleagues here who are project officers from the Saskatoon office and right across Canada, CNSC, sorry, I gotta keep my mouth on the mic here, so I'm just gonna look this way. The CNSC issues orders, and the inspectors have the powers to shut down operations. So we did shut down operations from small facilities to large facilities. And in addition to shutting down the operations, the licensees will be brought before the Commission in order to justify their qualification and why they need to continue to be licensed. That's one of the processes. And in this license renewal is the same processes where the applicant and us, the staff, will have to provide our data and factual information to the Commission in order to render its decision. So the powers of the inspectors are very powerful, and it's based on the safety and the facts that's being presented before it.
Okay, somebody, any other question? Mr. Taugiesi? Dr. McDeal?
Going back a number of years, maybe you could go back to the AECB and Pickering as an example of what the Commission, or the predecessor to this Commission at least, ruled. That's a very strong ruling, that one.
Sorry, I need it's Rams Jim for the record. Sorry, Dr. McDill, precision on with respect to the ECB for the pick. Sorry, I need some.
A little more. I believe under Agnes Bishop.
Yes. Okay, thank you. It's Rams Jim for the record. As a matter of fact, there were a couple situations where the just a bit more detail. The ACB, the Atomic Energy Control Board, the predecessor of the CNSC, has rendered decision. As a matter of fact, shut down a whole. Just deviate, but a facility that was producing nuclear substance for medical purposes, and the fact that was a mishandling of the situation in accordance to our act and regulation, the board at the time shut down and stopped the licensing process. With respect to the nuclear power plant facility itself, the information became available, and we staff came to the conclusion that certain parts of the operation was unsafe, and the board at the time, or the Commission, did shut down the operations accordingly. Again, I got to respect the time factor here without going into details, but I'll be more than happy to share with the intervener any depth information she would like to know on the safety aspect of shutting down an operation.
Anybody else? I'd like to ask you, you want to shut down the whole uranium mining because it's not needed, etc. What do you say to electricity generation in Ontario? 52% of electricity produced in Ontario, not to mention all the nuclear, the 400 nuclear power plants who are producing electricity, emission-free electricity. What do you say to them?
Are you trying to convince us of the moral feasibility of your industry based on the size of your industry?
I'm trying to understand what would you say to Ontario residents now that get electricity out of uranium?
Sure. Okay, so obviously we can talk about renewables then. This is just a question. Is there anybody here from the Commission who has a background, a scientific or technical background in renewable resources? Who can speak to? Okay, so nobody has a background in the science and technology of renewable. Now, does anybody on the Commission have a background in oil and gas? What is your background is only in nuclear. Nobody's ever worked for different kinds of corporations or anything like that.
We all have different days. We have a mining engineer. We have we have all kind of people here with all expertise. What is your question?
My question is why we're not having a discussion about renewable resources, why there's no technical expert. If you guys are regulators and you're supposed to remain neutral, why not make it a fair debate?
We are nuclear regulator.
For the future. Okay, but so analyzing what other kinds of energy resources might be more effective should be an integral process, an integral part of this process. Obviously, we're looking at nuclear versus other things, and it's worth it to look at. So we're looking at nuclear or nothing, apparently, to you. But that is not representative of what's going on this planet. There are other options for us.
Absolutely. There are wind and there's solar and there's all kind of other, and there's government policy. Yeah. Where do you want to invest? So you should go to the government policy and make a presentation about doing wind and solar and other renewables.
Okay, so what you've expressed to me is that neither anybody on the Commission, nor me, I'm just a student, but nobody on the Commission has the technical capacity to talk about renewables.
We do it.
There's nobody here to explain it to us. How is anybody supposed to make a good decision?
I guess you're not listening. Our mandate is nuclear only. We do not have any mandate to do trade-off between other alternatives. Okay, that's another policy matter.
No, this is interesting because I had this conversation as well when the Commission was here before about the capacity of your Commission. So what you're expressing to me is that you are very limited in your capacity. Now, when you can come back to my community and express to me how we might work together to look at new energy sources.
You can start by reading our act. Thank you for your presentation.
Can I make a couple of comments here?
Sure.
Thank you. Brian Lee, Fish Lake Métis. Ms. Scansen referred to neocolonialism in her presentation. We must all understand that the Supreme Court of Canada has very recently made determinations in the aspects of duty to consult and accommodate. Now, as a local Métis leader, I have been contacted by just the provincial government on about 15 different separate matters of duty to consult. I have posed questions to the Premier of this province on the Cameco's activities and so on in Northern Saskatchewan. One of the things, and I want to try and get everything in here in a short time. One of the things that you mentioned and you asked earlier was what would it take for you to have trust? And I think there was a reasonable answer to that, to your question. In March of this year, the Premier of Saskatchewan, speaking to a bunch of his supporters in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, was asked the question of programs for First Nations and Métis in Saskatchewan, and his answer was, no programs at all. The only thing for First Nations and Métis in Saskatchewan is Cameco. Now, I as a local leader got together with some other Métis people in Prince Albert and some First Nations people, and we held a press conference. And we took the Premier to task on that statement. But the Premier, in his position as Premier of this province, is absolutely on the side of Cameco. He references Cameco as a wonderful corporate citizen. Now, going to our Prime Minister of Canada, I'm sure, I don't know if that's actually who appointed you President of the Commission. Okay. Now, the Prime Minister of Canada has been going around the world selling Saskatchewan uranium. And he's talked to India, he's talked to China. So he definitely is on the side of greater production of uranium here in the province of Saskatchewan, essentially by Cameco and Areva. Now, with the Premier of the province in love with Cameco, and the Prime Minister of Canada thinking Cameco is just great for economics and jobs growth and all of that, when we come into duty to consult, my concern is, how do you have an effective, educated consultation with Aboriginal people when your elected leaders of the country and of the province are already on side with the proponent?
We can talk about this for a long, long time. So let me try to be sort of final answer to this. The Prime Minister does not promote uranium mining or Cameco. He promotes trade agreements. Okay? Trade agreements are, for example, in many, many countries with China, etc. He also promotes, as you know, with the US, with Europe, etc. Then each project that has to come under this particular international agreement has its own approval process with a duty to consult issue, safety mandate, and those are the mandate of regulators. So I differentiate between policy of government to us regulator executing in a very narrow mandate. So that's the reality of the way the framework works.
Back to my concerns about the Premier of the province. I had written him a letter, he wrote me back, and the discussion was on Cameco's future Millennium Project. And his response letter said to me, that the government, the Ministry of Environment, if you will, of Saskatchewan, is waiting for Cameco's own environmental impact statement. And once that is complete, then the government will determine whether or not to trigger duty to consult. Going back to this issue of trust, when the corporation does the environmental impact of their intended project, we're not that naive.
Well, no, that's not, again, this is not the process. They get tasked with a provincial, it's a joint environmental assessment between CNSC and the Ministry of Environment. We're going to talk about that later on. And Cameco is instructed in terms of putting up an environmental statement that goes through the rigor of science, public hearing, etc., etc. And you hopefully will get a chance to participate in that. Anyhow, we got to move on. So thank you for your presentation. You got 1 minute to wrap up and final discussion, final say.
Okay, I got 1 more minute left to live. Thank you. Safety. The old people said, "Boni." That's what they said. In other words, they are going to dig and using that make atomic weapons. And that's what the reactor business is. We know that. We've done our research. I went through the whole policy, the policy regarding indoctrination, assimilation, everything. I went through that. So, but at the same time, I can still listen to my old people, and they got a science that you guys will never get. We do. I speak it. Otia said, "Hey, not sir. You guys don't understand that. You never will." So that's the science that I come from. So when you guys are talking about safety, blow more weapons. WMDs, that's coming from these guys and those guys. That's where it's coming from.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for this presentation. Are we ready for another? Okay. A 10-minute break.